somewhere else. Thanks again, and thanks for caring about these vital issues. The focus of our third panel is looking ahead and where we should go from here. First, a question for the whole panel. Now, please bear with me, it's a little long. Given that the root causes of crime are complex, is it more practical, more efficient for Alabama to try to decrease the flow of incoming prisoners or just to increase prison space? Now, I know that seems like a false dichotomy, but since we're having trouble doing either, doing both doesn't seem especially realistic. So again, is it more practical or more realistic right now to focus on decreasing crime or on building prisons? Anyone feel free to jump in.
We look like a crowd that's just scared to death. Let me say this real quickly, and then I'll open up the other panelists. You can look at it two ways. You know, like you say, you decrease crime, you increase capacity. We are too far gone to increase capacity to a point that's constitutionally reasonable. If you look at in Legislative Fiscal Office, which for those of you who don't know, Legislative Fiscal Office is a nonpartisan agency that gives us numbers advice in the legislature. If I want to decrease the numbers to a 145% capacity, which is still not necessarily constitutional, it would cost an additional $623 million. You tell me out of a $1.75 billion general fund where you're going to get that kind of money. Can't do it. You're too far gone. You're too far gone to do that. I think you're going to have some new construction. There's no question about it, mainly because you have several facilities built in the 1940s that probably don't meet constitutional standards now. I think our long-term goal, though, not only for the prison population and the health of corrections in our budgets, but also for public safety in our society, we should be looking at how we can reduce crime. And so that involves other programs as well, and I turn it over to my fellow panelists.
Add something?
Yeah, I think when we talk about decreasing crime, I think a lot of times we tend to think about the deterrent effect of prison and hanging a prison sentence over your head to make you think that I will not commit this crime. And I think that is what sort of creates that false dichotomy, right? Because you're disincentivizing the crime by saying you're going to go to prison. I think instead, we probably need to start thinking about whether or not we can disincentivize the behavior that leads to crime or the situations that lead to crime. When I look in the population of people that I serve, oftentimes the criminal offense that they are charged with is the least of their worries in their lives. And going to prison is not even one of the things that they're really concerned about. They're concerned about their children who have been taken into DHR custody. They're concerned about, where they're going to live when they get out. And so we really need to take the focus of decreasing crime into decreasing poverty and decreasing the root causes of crime. And if we start to think about that, I think we'll naturally back off on prison population. We'll naturally need to construct less prisons.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the panel?
Well, I think that we've talked a lot tonight about what to do to help people when they come out of prison. And I've been a prosecutor for a long time, and I've never met anybody or a new inmate that just got out of prison who told me, I can't wait to go back there. They all want to make it. They want that second chance. They all think that they're going to. And what we've got to do is try to find ways to remove those roadblocks from them that keep them from making it. We've talked about that already tonight, the need for housing and transportation and so forth, and a job. But I think we need to look at another part of this situation here. And I can speak more authoritatively about the federal system. And, we have a finite number of bed space in prisons. So we have to figure out, who needs to be in those bed spaces. And the Attorney General has come out with a program that he calls Smart on Crime. And I'm not real crazy about it, about the name, but he's got a really good point. We need to be smart about who needs to go to prison. We need to reserve our prison space for our really bad offenders. We call them our worst of our worst. You got to make sure that you got room for those folks. But after that, we need to look at some of our other crimes and see should somebody, instead of locking them up in prison, is there some other way that they can be punished and they can be rehabilitated and they can come out and be a productive member of society? Because that's what we really want. We want them to come back out and be a contributing member of society. So in the federal system, we've looked at that, and we've started looking at a number of things. One, the Attorney General has given us discretion to look at our mandatory minimum sentences. And we try to determine whether this person is like a low-level drug dealer who, just because they got caught with a certain quantity of drugs, has to go to prison for a certain number of years. Instead, we want to look at, where does this person fit into the drug organization? Are they just a mule, or are they somebody who's been involved at a higher level? Are they connected to some sort of a gang, or are they a violent offender? And then we try to determine whether or not to apply those mandatory minimum sentences to those persons. It's things like this that can help us use our prison facilities more efficiently and more effectively. And I think we need to look at that side of the equation as well.
Would you be in favor, say, of increasing the amounts of drugs that trigger felony convictions, things like that, to reduce that inflow into prisons?
I don't think it's the quantity of the drugs so much. I think it's more important to look, what's this person's role in the offense? Just because they had a large quantity of drugs, this might be the first time that they have ever been a mule and they carried these drugs in. Whereas you've got a person who is, a more violent offender. He's carrying a firearm, and he's more a boss in the organization. You want that person to go to prison for a longer period of time.
Roughly 7% of all Alabama inmates is just drug offense by itself. It's just 7%. The problem is not just the drug offense or how much aware. The problem is I committed a property crime or a violent crime, but I was on drugs when I did it. And that's where that's what you've got to figure out, how to reduce that problem.
Right. Ms. Dillard, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I agree with several of the panelists. We supervise about 55,000 probationers, many of whom have never been to prison. If we can keep them out of prison, they won't go to prison, they won't lose their jobs, they won't lose their family support. It takes referral services. It takes services out in the community. It takes people to supervise them and lead them to those services. We try to put people in different risk categories and give more supervision to those who are more risky. And we've only had about 6% per year that return to prison really 5% on probation, about 6% on parole. So if we can keep them out, that's the best thing we can do. And then work with those that are coming out. But there are going to have to be some new prisons built.
Okay, thank you, panel. Now a few questions for individual panelists, and this first one is for Cam Ward. But with all these, once the panelist is done, feel free to jump in and add your thoughts. As chairman of the new Prison Reform Task Force, can you share a little bit about how the group plans to operate, or in other words, what are you all actually planning to do?
Well, first of all, don't reinvent the wheel. If you look at where the Council of State Governments, the Pew Institute, has gone in around the country, they've had some remarkable success, not only in reducing prison overcrowding, but also making sure that crime didn't go up and saving money in these states they did it in. And again, the angle I come at it from is if you look at Texas, you look at Mississippi, you look at Idaho, these are not soft on crime states by any stretch, but they got very smart in the reforms they did. And they had reforms that were not only remarkable in their success, but they're a model for everybody else to use. So why, instead of spending a lot of time and energy in reinventing what these states did, why not follow and emulate the best practices of each state? And I think that's our hope and goal going forward with the task force, is to look at what's worked in other places and how do they fit into our criminal justice system.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by success?
Great example in Texas. I go back again to the panel discussion I spoke on earlier with regard to community corrections. Governor Rick Perry just talked about this 2 weeks ago at the Conservative Political Action Committee. He said, guess what? I think I'm a conservative governor because I shut down a prison, crime went down, I reduced my inmate population, and I saved money. And, that may not appeal to everybody, but let me tell you something. What it does appeal to is appeals to me in that he accomplished the same goal of reducing the overcrowding, which should be our ultimate goal. And crime didn't go up, which means the recidivism rate didn't go up. So there's something working there with their alternative programs. If they can do that, we can too. Don't reinvent the wheel. Let's just be smart about following what other states' best practices have been.
And speaking of those sort of alternative pathways, Ms. Fontenot, it's a lot of the people that you represent, alternative sentencing would probably be helpful. How can various jurisdictions make sure people convicted of crimes get appropriate sentences, whether we're talking special classes, rehab, or prison?
Well, some of that falls on us as lawyers, right? When we get a client, we have to advocate for the people as a whole person. When you go into the criminal justice system, you begin a process of dehumanization. And it is our job as lawyers to bring the human side of our clients to the judge's attention so that those long sentences don't get imposed. And also to create a plan. We have to give judges a way to know that if they do set this person out, that there is a plan for their process, for them to get out of the system and for them to become gainfully employed and get treatment if it's needed. So that's the first thing. I also think we need to start to change the way we think about prison. I don't think there's real evidence that prison deters crime. And I think we need to start looking at data to determine if prison deters crime and give judges the information they need to determine if the person that's before them is a good candidate for prison.
Okay. I think that flows into another question that I had for you. Are the legal resources available to poor people facing prison time in Alabama? Are they adequate, not remotely adequate? How would you characterize them as a state?
In terms of funding or in terms of?
In terms of just the end result, the representation they get.
I think it can be hit or miss, frankly. Obviously, our state has undergone a very big change in how we provide indigent defense, which is what we do in our office. I think that is very much dependent upon who provides that indigent defense. I think the state intends to provide a good legal defense to all the people who are charged with crime. But we have to pay very close attention to the number of cases that people have, to the adherence to established practices in terms of what a representation should look like in order to make sure that happens. I think it's only been since 2011 since we revamped our system, and I think we need to give the state a little bit of time to make sure that those reforms that were in place actually get realized before we make that judgment.
And I sponsored that legislation, so I agree with you. It's you have to be very careful, and a lot of 10% of the legislature are attorneys. I'm an attorney. But there's not a lot of attorneys in the legislature. And if you're not in the legal profession, a lot of people don't realize the huge necessity of good indigent defense representation, particularly in capital murder, death penalty cases. And if you're not, there's a balance. Yes, you have to make sure that the system isn't being gained by attorneys making too much money off of it. But at the second, you have to make sure that every single client is getting adequate representation. They deserve that constitutional right. And so it is a balance, but I think the law is going to work, and I think we're getting there, but I'm not so sure we're completely there yet.
Would you say that most of your colleagues in the legislature agree with you on that right now?
No. I would say most of my colleagues think that all of us attorneys are just making a bunch of money. I would tell them I was making a bunch of money, I wouldn't ran for the legislature. So, no. I would say most people view indigent defense as one of those, so now why are we doing this? Because everyone under the Constitution is entitled to representation. And again, I have a background in law. Some people have a background in education. Others have it in business or whatever. A lot of people don't understand that, and that's it's just part of the process. But I think we all have an obligation to make sure that everyone understands there is a right to adequate representation in court, and that's something that we need to continue to fight to maintain.
Let me just piggyback a little bit on what Senator Ward is saying, even from the other discussion of building prisons versus it's a paycheck, it's a bottom line economic issue. It is cheaper for us to give a person a good lawyer at the trial level than to litigate appeal after appeal after appeal because of ineffective assistance of counsel. It is cheaper to have a good lawyer get a sentence reduced on the front end than have to have them in unneeded incarceration or on probation or parole for longer than they would have normally been. So, we don't seem very sexy, and no one wants to say that, it's a great thing to fund the representation of people who are accused of crime, but it actually makes fiscal sense to provide good representation early on.
It's interesting. It's sort of the same way good schools, good family supports can save us money in the long run. So maybe prevention is a common theme that we take away from here tonight. Speaking of which, Cynthia Dillard, for some of us, myself included, who don't know a lot about what your board does, what does the Alabama Board of Pardon and Paroles do, and why is that important to this conversation?
Okay, the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles are a 3-member board who determine who will be released from on parole from prison that are parole eligible. A lot of people think that everybody in prison are parole eligible, but that's not true. Split sentences, or about 40% who go in are not parole eligible. There are some mandatory minimum sentences that are not parole eligible. And of course, life without parole and death penalty are not parole eligible. But they send parole officers into the institutions, and the parole officers out in the field write pre-sentence investigations and post-sentence investigations, and the board looks at those and determines which they're going to review for parole and under what conditions, and also when they violate parole, whether they're going to revoke them. Most of the employees of the probation or Board of Pardons and Paroles are probation and parole officers. There's about 321 right now who supervise probationers and parolees, mainly for the courts. They write pre-sentence investigations for the courts and supervise probationers for the courts. And right now, their caseloads are about 192 to 1. So that's in addition to writing the pre-sentence investigations. And both the board and judges say all the time, if I had more officers, if my officers weren't so caseload heavy, I would put more people on probation or I would put more people on parole, but I just can't do that with your caseloads.
Right. Going back to your background, you were a parole officer. Going to overlap with the previous panel a little bit. What's the most important factor in keeping people from reoffending?
Family support and a job, I think. But
Anyone
family
else?
support is a lot, because the previous panel mentioned when you get out with a bus ticket and $10, if you don't have family support, you don't have much of a chance.
Right. Any thoughts?
I think family support's important, but I think I once heard Commissioner Thomas say that the average reading grade level of a person in the Alabama penitentiary is something like 4th grade, right? So if you have a person who has low skill level going in and low skill level coming out, readiness for rejoining the society, I think, becomes essential. And our society has to be ready to accept them as much as they have to be ready to get into society. And so, we need to reframe our discussion from punish to, does it make sense for the rest of us to continue to ostracize these folks?
And you have to believe, and I believe in the punishment side. I was a prosecutor in my former life too. I believe in the punishment side, but you cannot expect this person who's been punished, they've done their time, to be a productive citizen. If I look at them and say, by the way, you've paid your restitution, you've served your sentence, but now you can't have a driver's license, and therefore you can't get a job. What do you think they're going to do? I mean, really, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do anything. I think there was a previous panel said, when you're hungry, you have no home, you have no possibility of hope. What do you think they're going to do? You have to at some point say, yes, there has to be an opportunity to get a driver's license. There has to be an opportunity at some point to get a job, to be self-sustaining. Because if you don't give them that opportunity, you can just count on they're going to return to crime, because there's no other choice or hope they have.
Okay,
We need to identify like that type of a roadblock, and do something about that. But also, I noticed that a lot of prisoners, they go into incarceration, they come out, and they've got other legal problems that they weren't able to deal with when they were incarcerated. So they come out and they have to go deal with those other legal problems that say they got locked up, but they had another pending case, they didn't show up for court, they got a failure to appear, and then their problems just tend to multiply. And they come out and have this additional burden to have to deal with, and that's just another area that we should try to look at. I know our office, we have a reentry coordinator in our office, Jeremy Scher, who's here tonight, and he does a fabulous job of trying to bring different groups together to meet that chain that we spoke about earlier, the chain of people that can help the offenders after they get out. And I think that's a very important thing that we need to do. The U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance could not be here tonight because she's in South Carolina and couldn't make it back, but she's really put a lot of time and effort into this to try to bring groups together so that they can communicate. We have a lot of groups out there, a lot of faith-based groups and others that reach out individually and help people coming back into society, but we need to make that more a coordinated effort between these groups.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, but keep the same speaker. This question is also for Mr. Wisenant. Can you tell us about how federal authorities see Alabama's prison situation right now today?
Well, I can't speculate on anything in the future. I can just say that we have a good working relationship with the Department of Corrections right now, and they've been very cooperative with the department when we've made inquiries.
Okay. Well, we are really running out of time right now, thanks to our very sort of informed and passionate speakers. So I'm going to shift over to the audience questions right now. First is a question for Cynthia Dillard. In regard to taxpayer dollars, how much does it cost probation and parole to supervise offenders? How does this compare to community corrections daily costs, and how does it compare to other states?
It's less than other states, I know that, and it's right now probably $1.58 a day per offender. I don't know exactly what community corrections cost. I say we are community corrections. I know DOC is approximately $43 a day. I think DOC pays community corrections $10 a day for offenders. So ours is much, much less. We could do a lot more if we had more to work with.
Any thoughts?
As far as the costs, I don't know the numbers either. I think it just comes down to sort of an idea of how intensely you want to supervise and what methods you want to use to supervise. And I think, there's Foster Cook was here a little while ago. I don't know if he's still here, but the community corrections model has been shown to really do well with those folks who are in the program.
There's a number out there, too, that everyone needs to be aware of. This comes up in the comments part. If you go on AL.com, look on some of the comments section, and you always from time to time hear somebody say, we had tent prisons like they do in Arizona. Man, things would be so much better. They spend $51 per day per inmate to put you in a tent in Arizona. We spend $42.70 a day per inmate to put you in an Alabama prison. So that's how much cheaper we spend compared to using a tent. So just when you hear those urban legends, I like to dispel that because it's always amazing on that.
How's that possible?
Well, because what happens is we so underfund our correctional officers, we so understaff our facilities, we spend a lot less on health care, and they have to spend so much more because you don't have nearly the secure environment. And then if you get to community corrections, which is $11 a day, now you're really saving some money and you reduce recidivism.
And I was going to say, is this another case of sort of penny wise, pound foolish? We're saving money on the front end, but then, lawsuits pile up.
I call it the bumper sticker slogan politics. We love politics. If it fits on a bumper sticker, it's great. If it fits on this, it works great. If it's beyond that, then it can't be good policy. And at the end of the day, if you look at the numbers and dig underneath, you realize community corrections or as Partner Paroles has said their numbers, if you look at how much money you can save doing it that way and reduce recidivism, I mean, you're just stupid not doing it that way.
I think it may mean some explanation of what community corrections is might be in order. So when you go to community corrections, you are actually a Department of Corrections inmate who either goes to a facility and goes out every day in some counties, or in Jefferson County does not serve a custodial sentence, although they're technically a prison. So comparing community corrections to sort of pardons, paroles is probably a little bit of a false comparison, but you have a person on a very intense sort of outside but inside sentence.
Okay. We are very much, we're way over time right now, so I'm going to bring this to a close with a question for the whole panel. What can people out there do, people who care about this issue and want to get involved, what are some ways that they can just help out and follow their consciences?
Well, there's a lot of church groups you can get involved in with your church groups. There are a lot of church groups that like to help. There are a lot of adult reading classes that would help. There are some mentoring classes that you can get into and be a mentor. And you can vote for politicians who know what's going on and want to make a difference.
It goes back again to your public advocacy of your legislators. Here's the choice. End of the day, I said it before, courts will do it. We can do it by raising a lot of revenue, which I'm not so sure is going to get approved by the voters, and I respect that. Or we can make some really tough reforms in the system that we have. That's it. And I say it's simple, but that's your choices. And it's going to be up to the general public, though, to make their lawmakers do that. If you don't do it, if we as a state don't do it, trust me, there will be somebody who does it for us, and it's going to cost us a whole lot more money. You have to advocate with your public officials and say, I don't want my state going broke over prisons. I mean, you don't. And I don't want to, please don't think I'm negating the moral obligation we have, because we do. We have a constitutional standard we have to maintain. We have a public safety aspect we always have to protect. However, if we don't lobby our elected officials to make a hard choice in sentencing and other reforms in our programs, then we deserve what we get on that.
It would be hard for me to say it any better than that. I agree with that, those comments.
Yeah, I can only say that we need to change the conversation and take it from bright line rules into individualized assessments of individual people and their individual situations. If we start talking about what we can do like on a 50,000 foot level, we sort of miss the point. We have to give judges the ability to take into individual account of what's going on. We have to and take the people who come back out as individuals who may well be well worth taking a chance on.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It was a very provocative and thought-provoking evening. I hope this conversation continues, not just in the media, but in your homes and in offices and government agencies, and that's your government agencies. Now I'll turn it over to WBHM's General Manager, Scott Hanley, for some final words. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.